Mark Ridlen, first Dallas punk show. Probably 76 or 77. Ramones at the Longhorn Ballroom, and with the infamous Nerve-Breakers opening for them. It was incredible. I've never seen anything like the Nerve-Breakers. Ramones had a pretty good idea, but Longhorn Ballroom with the fake ID. And then after that was, then I moved to Dallas, I hijacked my mom's LeSabre, come across from Irving, come over to Walk on the Wild Side, and saw the beginnings, mainly that, Nerve-Breaker related things back then. And that was pretty much it, 77, 78.
Yeah, well, tell us about the Nerve-Breakers.
God, the first one, I remember them opening the Pistols more. And there's some footage, there's some photos you've all seen, but just the idea of just people in Western garb, torn up, it was just great, just the apparel. And the dead fish, all the lore, it's all on video. But they could actually play, which was interesting, because these guys were a few years older, somewhat older even than I was then. So that made a difference. So it was a lot to process. Wow, kind of country, this. They still have guitar solos, but it's not too solo-y. Tex is just still one of the best front people ever. And just seeing them twice in the same place, it was almost too much. So, and I was still in high school then, so it was great. I had a guy that looked like me. He was about 2 years older, and gave me his expired license, and I still have it. But if it weren't for that, I'd be missing out on a lot of this stuff, because they were fairly stringent about the admittance policy. But that was it. And then I went to some of the, I guess there were fly killer parties, earlier fly killer parties, these warehouse parties that some of these guys were involved with, Nerve-Breakers and older hippie people with, kind of pass themselves off as punk. That was great. It was just it was the fringe of the pioneers. And then the midnight movies, that was when that was peaking, and there were people going to the Festival Theater, and that's where I saw the Huns and the Norvells, and that was quite an experience. And that was, I think, early 79. And that's pretty much when I'd basically moved to Dallas by then. And that was great, because you had the films, art film students from Austin, both those bands from Austin, and the Huns were just over the top. And the Norvells as well. So that's pretty much it. So it's pretty much, from Irving to Dallas and back again. So.
Tell us about that Sex Pistols show with the Nerve-Breakers.
They set the bar so high, the Nerve-Breakers did. It was almost anticlimactic, I thought. And I love the Pistols' first album, but, they got on stage, it was a shamble, and you couldn't hear Sid, and it was great, but it just kind of stayed at this one level. And the crowd was more entertaining. I was taking pictures, I was standing right in front of Sid. The crowd behind me was as much more entertaining than what was on stage. And the Pistols, the Nerve-Breakers were, I said, it was perfect set they did on all levels. So they were a bit of a shambles, and then I just thought, I'd had, what was I drinking that night? I think rum and Coke, experimenting, one of my first experiments with hard liquor on my own, and I think I'd taken some kind of something else. So I was getting a little fuzzy. I left toward the end, so I actually walked out of the Pistols. I was like, yeah, fuck these guys. This is cool. It's great. I ran out of film, feeling pretty blurry. Had a big scary ass ride home. It was sleeting, snowing. Barely knew where I was. It was one of those nights where I thought I will never get this high again behind the wheel. It was like a real after school special thing, and I didn't wreck. Didn't end up. It was amazing. I remember just looking at the sleet coming down instead of looking at the road, and it was, I wasn't tripping, but it was something else. But it was pretty harrowing. So I made it home, lived to tell. And that was it. And then I see the footage and hear what they did through the board recordings, the Pistols, and it was like, it was all right. But I'm glad it was there and it was fun. But the Nerve-Breakers blew away 10 ways to Sunday. So it was packed. It was fun. I'm glad I took some shots of what I could. And yeah, it was Malcolm McLaren's a genius. That's all I can say. So for bringing the whole thing together.
Did you go to DJs?
Yep. I was there the first night. It was quote unquote DJs. It was there was a alternative fashion place next door that sold really great thrift store, fun go-go B-52s type clothes, vintage clothing. So there's a place down the street called Shady Lady, but this one was called Eclectricity, and it was opened up. It was their inaugural night. It opened that night, and they had a fashion show next door at DJ's, which had been open for about a year or two, and the owner, Dolores Noli, just saw some dollar signs, I believe, with the punk people that came in, and then a band called The Infants played. So it was like fashion show, after party at DJ's, and then she kept the format that way for the rest of, till it closed a few years later. But I was there that night, and that was great too. The Infants were incredible. That guy, Jeff Wesley, he was like a British Iggy Pop with even more of a sense of humor, and they were extremely theatrical and fun. Dangerous, but in a kind of a goofy way, which a lot of bands were like that then. So yeah, I was there on the first night. DJs was what it turned out to be. In all of its, I don't know, I think a lot of people were on acid that night. It was early June. I remember that. It was the first weekend of June. Starting to get kind of hot. A lot of the regulars there were Hispanic and or just old farts with no teeth, and that was great too. Once again, the crowd was more interesting, or as more so than what was on stage. So they didn't know what hit them, because they'd just been a local watering hole, and she thought, well, I need some kind of gimmick, so let's see what these punk kids have to offer. So Dolores, where are you now? We don't know.
What are some of the bands that play there mostly?
Oh gosh, the Scuds were great. Ejectors, boy, you had people like Joe King Carrasco. So you had people from Austin or whatever coming up, and then you had there's just so many. Just check out, there's an album called ESR, Are We Too Late for the Trend, and they were kind of like the burgeoning Dallas scene, kind of in one fell swoop. So all those guys would play. And once again, it was funny seeing the guys that were a few years old that had beards, and their hair would get shorter and shorter. And then the next month they'd have a little mustache, and then it'd be gone. And then they were, they have a dog collar around their neck. So it was a funny transitional period as far as, who was trying to pass himself off as punk or whatnot. So I was in a band called Quad Pie at the time, and we were kind of a reaction against the Sex Pistols. We were more in the no wave post-punk kind of thing, and so no solos, no good time rock and rolly thing. Even the Ramones, I thought at that time, I enjoyed them, I liked them, but it was just starting to sound too much like classic rock compared to what was coming out of New York and Berlin and that kind of thing. So, and it was like pre-hardcore as well, but that was more interesting to me, and that's what we were trying to kind of promote. That people really didn't know what to make of us, and we could barely play, which didn't help some nights. Someone told me, he said, sometimes I wanted to throw rocks at your guitars. Other nights I wanted to buy y'all beer, So it was hit or miss with us. We had a disastrous gig one night with a drum machine, because I'm not really into drum machines. We thought, well, we had problems with our drummer at the time. He was going through some kind of withdrawal thing, and we never thought to it helps if you run a drum machine through the monitor so you can hear it, and we didn't get that far, so we're playing along. It was just, I wish there was a footage of that, because it was probably like Devo meets the Shags or something. But anyway, we always got a pass. They always hired us back. I think we kind of scraped by the skin of our teeth, because we weren't really punk. We were, but we weren't. You had to kind of seen us to see what we're about. And we switched lineups a lot. We'd have girl singers. Went through a lot of different drummers, so people never really knew what to expect from gig to gig. So,
well, where did you guys play at mostly?
DJs, Hot Club, whatever was around. Back then it was very limited. It was pretty much DJs until, I guess, Hot Club opened up in mid-'80. And then we played, both those clubs are pretty easy to play in, but nothing beats a good loft party or like one of these fly killer parties or whatever. You could just take over, I still like that ethos.
Yeah.
These days, instead of playing on some kind of schedule with all the rules come with being in a quote unquote club. So
Who were like the core members of Quad Fight?
it was me and a couple of guys I went to high school with, John Painter and Tad Painter, and we were an offshoot of a band. They were already in. They were a kid band. We were all still in high school, and before we cut our hair and kind of got with the times, they had a band out of Irving that mostly played Presbyterian churches, and they were called Severed Universe. And they were into like, Styx, Sabbath, Kiss, just, the youngest member was like 13. Tad was like 13 or 14 then. I first met them. I was a senior. I was a few years older than them. And so I joined on as a singer, and I was about as skinny as that mic stand then, and I had a big Roger Daltrey hairdo, and I sort of hit high notes. I was always singing really, really flat, though. So we were doing, all the big hits of '76. I just thought it was kind of a goof, but they took it really seriously. And then I kind of got into it. Then I learned how to play bass a bit. So we were in a Ron Howard movie called Cotton Candy that was filmed in Dallas all around then. Have you guys seen that at all? Have you heard about it?
Yeah, now Towny Small.
Yeah, Towny Small, and really every Granada. So we just had a kind of shift of the ranks and kind of parted ways with a couple of the members, and then Quad Pie was kind of reborn about a year later. We moved to Dallas in early 80, and then we lived really close to DJs. I'd say we lived behind the Arcadia, so it was, I don't know, always the right place, right time back then. It seemed to be, we kind of like knew where to be just by osmosis. So I guess the midnight movies were still popular. The Granada was great. That was, oh man, that was just as much of an inspiration as going to these clubs, just all these fucked up art films and just crazy things you would never see. I mean, Texas Theater is probably the closest as far as fringe type cinema to see, but the Granada would be like, you can't even imagine. Just do some research sometime. It's like 1 week it's all Russ Meyer's films, and then I don't know what it was. I got a huge condensed. That just kind of went hand in hand with what I was into then, with film and video, photography, and music. Theater gallery. Well, first there was Studio D. Oh God, that was Studio D and Twilight Room. Studio D was Frank Campagna's kind of playpen, studio workspace, gallery. That was great, and that had one of the first. That had, I guess, when the hardcore thing started coming out in full force, '82 or so. He brought people played there, and it was a pretty big place. It was pretty rough and raw, and that was right before Liberty. What was it? Twilight Room. What were they called? What was Twilight Room called before that? Circle A Ranch. So that kind of fed off each other, and so that kind of slightly ignited the beginnings of Deep Ellum. So a few years later, Theater Gallery was born, and that was sort of the same thing. So with more space, I always liked that kind of twist of having the kind of fucked up art in the front and then punk rock in the back, and I don't know. It seems like kind of a lost art these days. It's hard to find that balance,
Yeah.
And people that know how to book the cool art as well as the cool bands. So
tell us about Circle A Ranch and Twilight Room.
Boy, I never really got any altercations around there. I guess I don't know. There was a lot of street people down there, a lot of riffraff, but you just kind of just made your way up into it. It was a God, what was it originally? My history's off. I used to go see a Dallas comedy troupe called Random Scam, and they would play upstairs, and then they I don't know, kind of changed hands somehow. I think there was a burger place underneath, or maybe it was a taco place. Anyway, you need to talk to people that were more closely involved with it, but that was great. Except once again, it was lots of room. DJs was about as big as this place, and it cozy is one thing, but when you book a bunch of bands in there from, have a big Memorial Day thing, whatever. There's just more room to grow. There's upstairs and downstairs at the Twilight Room, and saw G.G. Allen there. That was insane. That was in one of his first shows. That was pretty good. Of course, never a dull moment with him.
About Stickmen with Ray Guns. Where'd you see them at? Like, what clubs they playing at?
Well, in the beginning, there was the Teenage Queers, and that was Bobby Sox and some of his friends, and then that kind of morphed into the Telephones backing him up, and that was, and then from that there was a bit of a lull, and we let him stay with us a few times. The first 2 Quad Pie houses. The first one, he was kind of adrift, and I said, well, we'll back you up. I was playing him some Alan Vega, the guy from Suicide, his first solo album, and his kind of twisted, kind of no-wave version of rockabilly. And Bobby's like, I can do better than that. And so we kind of jam around our my living room, and from that it turned into Bob Beeman was one of our high school friends. It was me, Bob Beeman, John Painter, a few other people, and it was called The Enemy. And so that was pre-Stickman, and we played a few gigs, and then Quad Pie was still active, and so it just kind of splintered into more full-time people. Clark Blacker from Nerve Breakers, him, Bob, and Scott Elam, and that was Stickman proper. So that's what that was. But yeah, I like to think I kind of pushed Bobby in that new flipper kind of thing, no wave. I don't know. He was in. I remember some of his early covers were when I kind of stepped out of it was they would do Born to Be Wild. Remember we used to jam on 25 or 6 to 4, Chicago. I wish I had some of these Jambox recordings. They're all long gone, but we used to jam on the stupidest stuff, and he just loved it. Bobby would just love to sing and caterwaul and act out as he often did, even when he wasn't on stage. So, but yeah, that was that.
What are some of your favorite Dallas bands from any era? 90s, 80s?
Jeez, let's see. Well, there was a big rockabilly country thing. That was a whole... Tex Edwards made me appreciate a lot of country that I kind of, I just wasn't really listening to with the proper ears at that time. Barry Coodet also, Donnie Ray Ford, all those guys were playing alongside what we were doing, that kind of thing, very early 80s. So, God, I'm trying to think, one band that comes to mind that was really out there, or several, but I'd like to maybe put out a CD or album with their stuff. I don't know where they are. I know where a couple people are, possibly, but they're a band called Rote Biological, and they were extreme art rock. I mean, we were pretty... We were bit in that terrain. Quad Pie was, but these guys were. I don't know how to. Oh boy, Fred Frith meets a little bit of Devo and Residents and Talking Heads, all that stuff, but in a real tight, like it was performance art. Like they didn't talk the crowd. They just went from one song to another one. It was all very rehearsed, but very, very comical and very atonal. Very much 1980 sounding, and we used to play with them quite a bit. Oh, there's a place called Metamorphosis Concert Hall. Can't forget that.
Yeah, what was that like?
That was a record store. Had been around since the late 70s, and they moved from Howell Street to Allen Street, and decided to make the space next door a little. It was almost garage size. That was pretty cool. That was 80 to 81 or 2, and they had hardcore bands. I think some of my first and last shows with Bobby Sox as bass player. Then and they would have like the Belladie Ensemble. They were like a Middle Eastern belly dance group. It was very eclectic there, and the couple that ran it were quite a bit older than us, and their tastes were pretty varied. Then you'd have power pop bands like the Cyberphonics, Superman's Girlfriend, of course, all the usual suspects that people were playing around. But that was a lot of fun because that was more like, sort of like Rubber Gloves in Denton, but smaller. And then you had the record store around it. So, yeah, I can't leave that place out. But, gosh.
What was Superman's Girlfriend like?
Superman's Girlfriend they're pretty tight. Like I said, they're a little older than us, and they had the chops down. I always liked multiple singers. I guess this is. I don't think they were influenced by X, but they had a guy and a girl singer simultaneously. Several bands were like that. There's a band called Lolly and the Tanks that played in DJs quite a bit. They were fun. The Scuds. Scuds at the top of the list, and they were one of the ones that really influenced Bobby on all levels. Bobby Sucks was a big Scuds fan, as we all were. Are you familiar with them, or have you heard of them?
I've heard of them, but I haven't heard the music.
Yeah. They were kind of like, some of the members were kind of, I don't know, inbred brothers, cousins, whatever. It was just kind of a loose family group. And the singer, I think he had leukemia, and he lost all of his hair. And he only had like about a year or so to live. So that was the pinnacle of punk rock. And his name was Platinum Paul, and he was a sweetheart. He was a really great guy, great front person. They pretty much wrote all their own songs, and Bobby would get up there and sing with them, and that was one of the more, oh man, they were just the full package, they're just, it's kind of like the Ramones, just you can't see them doing anything else but being that band and do what they did. The Scuds with a K. The Nerve-Breakers, of course. Later on, there's a band called Spazbot that was pretty interesting.
Did you see the Loco Gringos?
Gringos were much later. They were like mid-later part of Theater Gallery. But, oh gosh, I'm trying to think. They have a lot of bands that I didn't know where they were from. If they're from Dallas, and 2 weeks later I'm like, oh, they were from Houston. I didn't know. All-girl band called the Foams from Austin. They were pretty interesting. I don't know. I was always looking for something that was a bit more than just your average meat and potato rock and roll thing, because I was just hungry for change and just like, okay, we know what that sounds like. All right, yeah, we've heard that Dictator song, or we've heard this, whatever, let's. So, like I said, I really know New York. Hearing that when I did was really great. They had songs that were like 30 seconds long, and there's just completely just cut all the fat off of what rock was supposed to be then. It was very confrontational, but it was fairly atonal too. I remember back when Pill came out and how many people that loved the Sex Pistols hated Pill, and I thought that was kind of a rite of passage, or it's like, well, he's taking us along this journey, okay, and we went along with that. Pretty much up to now. His last show was okay, but just that whole thing, stripping it, minimal can you be and still convey something and still have a show, There's a lot of two-man bands then that weren't, I think if you can convey that in when you only have 2 or 3, members, that's intriguing to me.
What were some old Dallas labels? VVV? Or,
There weren't that many. VVV was pretty much, they had the family deep pockets to kind of keep that going, of the store, and the t-shirts, and the labels, and the shows, and it was great. Yeah, that was a total dynasty too. VVV was, I guess, had the most longevity of all the local record stores and whatnot. So, yeah, Neil Caldwell had a band called NCM. They were great. They always delivered. Once again, they were older. They came from a jazz background. They'd played. Some of these guys I didn't know until years later. I'm like, wow, they knows how to play a Fender Rhodes. Neil had one of those things called a Mellotron, and it's like the Beatles played on Strawberry Fields. It's like a original sampler. It was a small keyboard. It was built in the '60s with tape loops on each key. He had one of those. He never played it with them, but so Bag of Wire. That was Stacks of Tracks, of course. Stacks of Tracks, incredible record store back then too. The owner, they're still around. He lives out not in Dallas anymore, but they were great. So it was cool and refreshing. I can't even think of that really right now. Any parallels with people that had labels, stores, and were in bands, and they were actually cool guys and people you want to hang out with, and they had good taste. So, the more I think about it, we had a pretty good little scene here, yeah. As far as all that.